Beneath the fractured moon, a single drop of blood traced the curve of her collarbone like a lover's forgotten promise. The wind howled through the jagged peaks of the Frostfang Mountains, carrying the scent of pine and betrayal on its icy breath. Alara stumbled forward, her bare feet sinking into the snow that clung to the world like a shroud. The pack's rejection had been swift, a ritual as old as the bones buried beneath the eternal white. They had stripped her of her furs, her name, her place among them, leaving her with nothing but the thin shift that whipped against her skin and the collar de sangre around her neck, its iron chain heavy with the dried crimson of her own veins. It was no ornament. It was a mark, forged in the heat of her marking ceremony gone wrong. When the Alpha who claimed her had recoiled from the bond, his eyes filled not with fire, but with disgust. "You are no mate for a warrior," he had snarled, his voice echoing in the great hall under the watchful gaze of the pack. The elders nodded, their faces carved from stone as they invoked the ancient law. An Omega who could not bind her Alpha was a curse upon the bloodline, a harbinger of weakness. Alara had felt the words like claws raking her soul, deeper than any physical wound. She was not weak. Her spirit hummed with the quiet power of the old ways, whispers from the goddess that others dismissed as madness. But in their eyes, she was tainted, her inability to soothe the Alpha's rage a sign of her unworthiness. Now, exiled to the borderlands, where the snow never melted and the wolves sang dirges to the dead, she pressed on. The cold seeped into her bones, a relentless companion that mirrored the ache in her chest. Each step crunched against the frozen earth, the sound swallowed by the vast silence of the wilderness. Far below, the valley of her former home flickered with torchlight, warm, distant, untouchable. She could almost hear the laughter of the pack, the crackle of fires where stories were shared and bonds forged. But those fires no longer called to her. They had cast her out like chaff in the wind, leaving her to the mercy of the storms and the beasts that prowled the heights. Alara paused at the edge of a sheer drop, her breath fogging the air in ragged bursts. The moon hung low, its silver light bathing the landscape in ethereal glow, turning the snow to a sea of shattered diamonds. She touched the collar de sangre, its weight a constant reminder of the night it was placed upon her. The Alpha's claw had drawn the blood himself, sealing what should have been eternal devotion. Instead, it bound her to isolation, the iron links etched with runes that pulsed faintly against her skin, as if alive with unspoken regret. Why did it not fade? Why did the goddess spare her this one cruel token amid the stripping of all else? A distant weevo pierced the night, a lone wolf perhaps, or the echo of her own grief. Alara's heart clenched. She had always been the quiet one, the Omega who mended wounds and whispered prophecies in the hush of dawn. But prophecies were dangerous in a pack driven by conquest. Her visions of shadowed thrones and fallen kings had unnerved them, branding her as the bringer of doom. The goddess speaks through the worthy, the elders had decreed, banishing her to wander until the wild claimed her or she proved her visions false by surviving alone. The wind shifted, carrying the metallic tang of blood, not her own, but fresh, mingled with the musk of exertion and fear. Alara's senses sharpened, the Omega instincts buried deep within her stirring like embers in ash. She scanned the tree line where ancient pines stood sentinel, their branches heavy with frost. Shadows moved there, not the graceful prowl of wolves, but something heavier, burdened. A figure emerged from the gloom, staggering against the gale, his form cloaked in a manto rasgado that fluttered like a banner of defeat. He was no ordinary wanderer. Even in the moon's pale wash, his presence commanded the night, broad shoulders etched with the scars of battle, eyes that burned with a feral gold. Blood streaked his fur-trimmed cloak, and he clutched his side where a wound wept crimson onto the snow. An alpha, she knew instinctively, his aura crashing against her like a wave, stirring the Collar de Sangue to a warm throb. But this was no pack lord from her valleys. His bearing spoke of higher realms, of thrones and wars that shook the earth. He collapsed to one knee mere paces from her, his breath a labored growl. Ilara froze, torn between flight and the pull of that ancient call, the bond that Omegas answered, even to their peril. Fear coiled in her gut, sharp as the cold, but curiosity flickered beneath it, a spark in the void. Who was this stranger, felled by the mountain's wrath? And why did the moon seem to lean closer, as if to witness their paths entwine? The Alpha lifted his head, his gaze locking onto hers. In that moment, under the fractured sky, Ilara felt the first tremor of something unspoken, a thread of destiny weaving through the storm. But she turned away, the exile's creed holding her back. Trust no one, for the wild devours the unwary. Yet as she moved into the shadows, the Collar de Sangue burned against her skin, whispering of trials yet to come. The Alpha's gaze held her like chains forged in the forge of forgotten oaths, golden eyes piercing the veil of falling snow. Ilara's pulse thundered in her ears, a wild rhythm that drowned the wind's lament. She should run. The wilds demanded it, her exile a vow etched in frost upon her soul. Yet her feet rooted to the frozen ground, the Collar de Sangue warming against her throat as if recognizing kin in his bloodied form. He was no mere outcast. The air around him hummed with the weight of command, a king's aura frayed but unbroken, like a crown trampled under iron heels. With a guttural rasp, he extended a hand, calloused fingers glistening with his own lifeblood. "Water," he murmured, voice gravel and thunder, carrying the timbre of halls where decrees shaped empires. Not a plea, but an expectation, the arrogance of one born to rule, even as death clawed at his flanks. Ilara hesitated, the curiosity uncoiling within her like a serpent from slumber. Who pursued him? The scent of pursuit lingered on the breeze, smoke and steel, the acrid bite of armored foes closing in from the shadowed valleys below. She edged closer, her shift whispering against the snow, every sense alive to the peril. The manto rasgado draped his shoulders like a fallen banner, its edges frayed by thorns and blades, embroidered threads of gold dulled by the night's embrace. Up close, his wounds told tales of betrayal, a gash across his ribs, deep enough to steal breath, and claw marks raking his arm, not from beast, but from kin turned rival. His face, chiseled by wars long etched in legend, bore the mark of guilt. Lines etched deep, eyes shadowed not just by pain, but by the ghosts of choices that had cost him everything. Kneeling at arm's length, Ilara cupped snow in her palms, letting it melt against her skin until droplets formed. She offered them to his lips, her touch feather-light, avoiding the spark that threatened to ignite between them. Instinct warred within her, the Omega's call to heal, to bind, clashing against the exile's creed of solitude. "Why here?" she whispered, her voice a thread in the gale. "The mountains claim the wounded without mercy." He drank slowly, his throat working under the stubble of neglect, then met her eyes again. "Fate's cruel jest," he replied, the words laced with a bitterness that tasted of ash. "I am Thorn, once king of the ironclad realm, betrayed by my counsel, hunted by the shadow packs that crave my throne. The goddess mocks me with this sanctuary." His gaze flicked to the Collar de Sangue, recognition flickering like moonlight on water. "And you, marked yet unbound. What curse do you bear, Omega of the wilds?" Ilara's fingers tightened around the melting snow, the cold biting deeper than before. She had not spoken her name since the banishment, had not shared the weight of her visions with any soul. But his presence stirred the embers of her gift, whispers from the lunar temples rising unbidden. A king surrounded, a smile in the face of doom, an Omega's voice cutting through the storm. Fear twisted in her gut, not of him, but of the pull, the instinctive weave of their sense mingling like smoke from a shared fire. She denied it, rationalizing the warmth in her veins as mere survival's trick. "Ilara," she said at last, the name fragile on her tongue. "Exiled for dreams that unsettle the strong. Leave me to my path, king or no. The wild spares no one." Before he could respond, the night shattered. Weavos echoed from the tree line, not the solitary cry of wolves, but a chorus, feral and orchestrated, accompanied by the distant clash of steel on stone. Thorn's body tensed, a low growl rumbling from his chest as he pushed to his feet, swaying but defiant. "They come," he said, drawing a dagger from his boot. Its blade etched with runes that glowed faintly under the moon. 10,000 shadows at my heels, but they fear the peaks. Help me stand, Ilara, or watch a crown fall to dust. She could flee now, vanish into the labyrinth of ice and pine, her exile unbroken. But the Collar de Sangue pulsed in rhythm with his labored breaths, a silent command from the goddess herself. Curiosity won, born of the fear that gripped her, fear of loneliness more profound than the cold. She slipped under his arm, bearing his weight as they stumbled toward a nearby crevice, a narrow fissure in the rock face veiled by overhanging branches. The manto rasgado caught on jagged stone, tearing further, but she pressed on, the heat of his body seeping through her shift like forbidden fire. They collapsed into the shelter as the first pursuers crested the ridge, dark silhouettes against the snow, eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. Thorn's hand found hers in the dimness, not in affection, but alliance, his grip iron yet trembling. Empathy bloomed unbidden in Ilara's chest, a fragile vine pushing through frozen earth. He was no monster, this broken king. His guilt hung heavy, a shroud woven from the lives he'd led to ruin in the name of duty. She saw it in the way his free hand clenched, as if strangling regrets long past. The enemies passed close, their boots crunching perilously near, breaths fogging the air with snarls of frustration. One paused, sniffing the wind, and Ilara's heart stilled, the Collar de Sangue a hot brand against her skin. Thorn's eyes met hers in the shadows, a silent pact forming. Survival first, questions later. As the pack moved on, swallowed by the storm, the cave's chill wrapped around them like a reluctant embrace. His wound needed tending, her visions murmured of greater trials, but for now, refuge held. The bond stirred, resisted, yet undeniable, a thread pulling them from the brink. In the hush that followed, Ilara traced the edges of his gash with careful fingers, the metallic tang of blood mingling with the earth's damp scent. Thorn watched her, his golden gaze softening, the first crack in his armored melancholy. "You could have left me to them," he said softly, voice a rumble in the confined space. "And condemn us both to the wild's indifference?" she replied, her touch steady despite the tremor in her soul. The moon filtered through the crevice, silvering the blood on his skin, turning pain into something almost sacred. Yet doubt lingered, a shadow in her heart. Was this connection salvation or another chain? And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The cave's breath was damp and ancient, exhaling secrets from stone veins that had witnessed empires crumble into dust. Ilara's fingers trembled as they pressed a wad of torn cloth, ripped from the hem of her shift, against Thorn's wound, the fabric soaking through with the warmth of his blood. It seeped into her skin, sticky and vital, a reminder that life persisted even in the jaws of betrayal. The Collar de Sangue at her throat hummed in response, its runes flickering like distant stars, as if the goddess herself approved this fragile alliance. She ignored the pull, focusing instead on the rhythm of his breathing, shallow and ragged, sinking unwillingly with her own. Thorn's golden eyes, half-lidded in the dim light filtering through the crevice, studied her with an intensity that bordered on accusation. "Mercy from an exile," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the confined space, stirring the fine dust on the cavern floor. "The wilds teach cruelty, not kindness. What do you seek in return? My throne? My gratitude?" There was no venom in his words, only the weariness of a man who had commanded legions, yet failed to command loyalty. His hand, large and scarred from years of wielding scepters and swords, hovered near hers, not touching, but close enough to share the heat that defied the encroaching chill. Ilara withdrew her hand, wiping the blood on her thigh, the metallic tang sharp in her nostrils, mingling with the earthy musk of moss and the faint, acrid smoke from distant campfires. "Nothing," she said, her voice steady despite the storm within. "Survival demands no debts. Your enemies are shadows in the snow, mine are memories that bite deeper." She shifted back against the rough wall, drawing her knees to her chest, the cold stone leaching warmth from her bones. The manto rasgado lay discarded between them, its golden threads catching the moonlight like veins of forgotten ore, a symbol of his fallen glory. She had seen kings before, in visions that haunted her sleep, thrones toppled by whispers in the dark, councils poisoned by ambition. But Thorn's guilt was palpable, a weight that bowed his shoulders even now, as if the crown he once wore had been forged from the bones of the betrayed. Outside, the wind howled its eternal dirge, whipping snow against the rock face in furious gusts. The pursuers' weavos had faded into the night, but their presence lingered like a predator's scent, promising return. Ilara's mind raced with the Omega's curse, to sense the fractures in others, to mend what was meant to break. She had felt it in her own pack, the Alpha's rejection, a blade that severed not just bond, but soul. "Tell me of your war," she said softly, breaking the silence that pressed heavier than the cave's shadows. "The ironclad realm, does it bleed as freely as you?" Thorn's laugh was a bitter rasp, echoing faintly off the walls. He propped himself up on one elbow, wincing as fresh blood welled from the gash. "Bleed? It drowns in it. My council, those serpents in fur and finery, plotted under the full moon while I fought border skirmishes for the goddess's sake. They crave the old ways, conquest without conscience, packs merged by force rather than fate." His gaze drifted to the crevice, where the moon's silver light painted the snow in strokes of ethereal blue. "I spared the enemy Omegas in the last siege, saw mercy as strength. They called it weakness. Now, 10,000 blades hunt me, led by my own brother, who wears my betrayal like a new cloak." Ilara's heart clenched, the collar de sangue warming as if in sympathy. She knew betrayal's sting, the pack's elders invoking law to mask their fear of her visions, banishing her to preserve their illusions of power. Empathy stirred unbidden, a tender ache blooming amid the pain, drawing her closer despite the rational voice screaming retreat. She reached for the manto rasgado, draping it over his shoulders, the fabric rough against her palms, carrying the faint scent of pine resin and royal incense. "Strength is not in the blade," she whispered, echoing the goddess's murmurs that had once earned her exile. "It is in choosing the path that spares the innocent. What wound does your brother carry to turn kin to foe?" His eyes met hers, the gold softening to amber in the low light, vulnerability cracking the king's facade. For a moment, the cave felt smaller, the world narrowing to the space between them, the shared warmth of bloodied cloth, the synchronized rise and fall of breaths. "Guilt mirrors guilt," Thorn admitted, his voice threading through the hush like smoke. "I denied him the throne's burdens to protect him, but he saw it as scorn. Now he rallies the shadow packs, promising them the realms united under iron, not compassion." He paused, his fingers brushing hers as he adjusted the cloak, the contact electric, igniting instincts she buried deep. The bond whispered of destiny, of an Omega's quiet power, healing a king's fractured oath. But she resisted, rationalizing it as the cave's illusion, born of isolation and storm. A sudden crack echoed outside, branches snapping under boot. The low growl of wolves herded by men. Thorn tensed, his body coiling like a spring despite the pain, dagger in hand once more. Ilara's senses sharpened, the collar de sangue pulsing urgently, visions flickering at the edge of her mind, flames licking castle walls, a brother's blade raised under a blood moon. The enemies were circling back, drawn by some unseen trail, their torches flickering like malevolent eyes in the night. "We move," Thorn growled, pulling her to her feet with a grip that was alliance forged in fire. She nodded, the empathy solidifying into resolve, their sense intertwining, snow and blood, pine and regret, as they slipped deeper into the cave's labyrinth. The Manto Rasgado trailed behind like a ghost, catching on stalactites that wept icy tears. They pressed on through narrow passages, the air growing colder, heavier, with the mineral bite of underground rivers. Her hand in his was necessity, not desire, yet the touch lingered, weaving threads of trust amid the peril. Hours blurred into a tense vigil, the cave's depths offering fractured refuge. They huddled in a wider chamber where moonlight pierced through a high fissure, bathing them in its glow. Ilara kindled a small fire from scavenged tinder, dry moss and Thorn's flint, its flames dancing like captive spirits, casting shadows that played across his face. The warmth was a balm, thawing the frost from her limbs, but it illuminated the raw edges of their wounds, his physical, hers etched in solitude. As he slept fitfully, guarded by her watch, Ilara traced the collar de sangue, feeling its runes pulse in time with the fire's crackle. The bond deepened here, in this womb of stone, empathy turning to an unspoken vow, protect the broken king or lose the last spark of her own light. But doubt gnawed at her core, a spiritual dilemma under the moon's unblinking eye. Was this refuge a step toward redemption, or the first chain in a new exile? The fire popped, sending embers skyward, and in their glow Thorn stirred, his hand seeking hers once more. The night held its breath, waiting for the choice that would bind or break them. The fire's embers whispered secrets to the stone, their glow a fragile ward against the cave's encroaching dark. Ilara sat vigil, her back pressed to the chill wall, the collar de sangue a steady pulse at her throat like a second heartbeat. Thorn's form lay still before her, his chest rising and falling in the uneven cadence of uneasy sleep, the manto rasgado bundled around him like a shroud woven from regrets. The air hung heavy with the scent of smoldering moss and congealing blood, a metallic undercurrent that clung to her skin, reminding her of the thin line between healer and hunted. Outside, the wind's howl softened to a mournful sigh, but the night felt alive with unseen eyes, the moon's light fracturing through the fissure above like splintered prophecy. She traced the runes on the collar with trembling fingers, their faint warmth a counterpoint to the cold that seeped from the earth. Since her exile, the visions had been fragments, shards of moonlight piercing the veil of her isolation, showing her nothing but her own unraveling. But here, in this buried sanctum with a fallen king, they stirred with new urgency, coiling in her chest like smoke from the dying flames. Empathy had rooted her to his side, transforming fear into a tentative bond, yet doubt lingered, a spiritual thorn. Was she mending a stranger or inviting the wild's jaws closer? The goddess's whispers, once dismissed as madness by her pack, now hummed with insistence, urging her toward something vast and unforgiving. Thorn stirred, his golden eyes snapping open, alert despite the pallor of blood loss. He sat up slowly, wincing as the gash pulled taut, fresh crimson welling against the makeshift bandage. "The silence is a lie," he growled, his voice rough as gravel under boot. They circle like wolves scenting weakness. My brother's shadow packs, 10,000 strong, their loyalty bought with promises of glory and gold. His hand found the dagger at his side, knuckles whitening. The blade's runes catching the firelight in a dance of ancient warnings. Guilt shadowed his features, etching deeper lines around his mouth. She saw it now, clear as the moon's reflection in a frozen pool, the weight of a king who had chosen mercy over conquest, only to watch his realm fracture in retribution. Ilara met his gaze, the air between them thickening with unspoken currents. "Visions don't lie," she said softly, the words escaping before she could cage them. "They reveal what the heart denies." She had not meant to confess, but the collar de sangue burned hotter, as if demanding truth. The fire crackled, sending sparks upward like fleeing souls, and in that instant, the world tilted. A vision seized her, unbidden and fierce, pulling her under like the tide of a blood moon. She saw it all. Thorn upon a throne of iron and ice, surrounded not by allies but enemies. The shadow packs massing under a storm-lashed sky, their howls a symphony of betrayal. His brother, face twisted in triumphant rage, raised a claw to strike the fatal blow. But then an Omega's voice cut through the chaos, soft yet unbreakable, commanding the fray. "Do what she said." Thorn's lips formed the words, pointing to the figure at his side. Her, Ilara, her collar de sang gleaming like a beacon, her eyes alight with the goddess's fire. The enemies faltered. The tide turned not by blade but by revelation, a destiny woven from rejection's ashes. Mercy crowned the fallen, rejection became the key to the realm's salvation. Ilara gasped, wrenching free from the grip, her body shuddering as sweat beaded on her brow despite the cave's frost. The fire seemed dimmer now, its flames bowing to the vision's afterglow, and blood trickled from her nose, a thin rivulet mirroring the collar's eternal stain. Thorn was at her side in an instant, his hands steadying her shoulders, the heat of his touch grounding her in the present. "What did you see?" he demanded, his voice laced with urgency and something deeper, recognition, as if the threads of fate had brushed his soul as well. His golden eyes searched hers, the king's melancholy cracking open to reveal raw vulnerability, the guilt that had armored him yielding to wonder. She wiped the blood away, her breath coming in shallow bursts, the metallic taste sharp on her lips. "You," she whispered, the words heavy with the vision's weight, surrounded by 10,000, yet smiling in the face of the storm. "You point to me, an Omega, exiled and unmarked, and bid them obey. The goddess has marked me not for binding, but for guiding. Pathfinder, they called it in the old lunar temples. One who sees the paths unseen, heals not wounds of flesh, but fractures of throne and blood." The collar de sangue thrummed in affirmation, its runes glowing faintly, casting crimson shadows across his face. For the first time, she felt its purpose, not curse, but conduit, a symbol of the power her pack had feared and cast away. Thorn released her slowly, his hands lingering as if afraid the moment would shatter. He rose to his knees, the manto rasgado slipping to pool at his feet, exposing the scars that mapped his life's battles, each one a testament to choices that had led him here, broken and hunted. "The prophecies of the Ironclad spoke of such a one," he said, his voice a reverent rumble, the Alpha's command softened by awe, an Omega unbound, whose voice would command the shadows. "I dismissed them as tales to bolster weary warriors. But you are the key, Ilara, the redemption I sought not in conquest, but in surrender to fate." His gaze held hers, the bond they had resisted now surging like a river freed from ice, instinctive, undeniable, born of shared pain under the moon's watchful eye. Yet as the revelation settled, a moral chasm yawned before her. The vision promised union, a love that redeemed through trial, but at what cost? Her exile had taught her freedom's bitter solitude. To embrace this destiny meant stepping into the heart of war, binding her light to his shadowed throne. The fire popped, embers flaring bright, illuminating the blood on her hands, hers and his, mingled in the dirt. Outside, a distant uivo rose, closer now, the enemy's pursuit tightening like a noose. Thorn extended his hand, not as king but as equal, the weight of his guilt lifting slightly in the promise of her gift. "Will you walk this path with me?" he asked, the question a spiritual crossroads, echoing the goddess's eternal query. Power through compassion, or liberty in the wild's embrace? Elara hesitated, the Collar de Sangue a burning compass, the moon's light filtering down like divine judgment. The cave held its breath, the flames dancing in anticipation of her choice, a revelation that bound them or severed them forever in the name of self-preservation. Like if you believe rejection can become destiny. The cave's fissure wept silver tears under the moon's unyielding gaze, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters across the stone. Elara's breath caught in her throat, the Collar de Sangue a searing brand against her skin, its runes pulsing with the rhythm of her pounding heart. Thorn's hand remained extended, his golden eyes a storm of expectation and quiet desperation. The weight of his fallen crown mirrored in the vulnerability etched upon his face. The vision's echo lingered in her veins like venom and elixir, 10,000 enemies encircling him, yet his smile defiant, his finger pointing to her as the voice of salvation. Pathfinder. The word hummed through her, a revelation that shattered the exile's isolation, yet it demanded a price. To step from the wild's solitary embrace into the fray of thrones and blood. She took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his, not in surrender, but in the raw acknowledgement of shared fracture. The touch ignited the bond they had both resisted, a visceral pull that flooded her senses. The musky warmth of his skin, the faint salt of sweat mingled with pine from the manto rasgado discarded at their feet. "I will walk," she whispered, her voice threading through the hush like frost on glass. But not blindly. The goddess reveals paths, not promises. Your brother's shadow looms. We face it together, or not at all. The words were her choice, moral and unyielding. Compassion over the wild's indifferent freedom, yet laced with the fear that love might chain her as surely as rejection had scarred her. Thorn nodded, rising with a growl that masked his pain, the gash at his side weeping fresh crimson onto the cavern floor. He retrieved the manto rasgado, draping it over her shoulders now, its frayed gold threads catching the moonlight like veins of reluctant alliance. The fabric carried his scent, enveloping her in a cocoon of regret and resolve, heavier than any fur she had once known in her pack. They moved then, slipping from the cave's womb into the labyrinth of peaks, the wind rising to greet them with a chorus of howls that spoke of encroaching doom. Snow crunched underfoot, each step a deliberate defiance, the cold biting deeper as they descended toward the valley where Thorn's past waited like a blade in the dark. The journey blurred into a tapestry of endurance, narrow ledges slick with ice where one misstep would send them plummeting into abyssal white. Hidden passes veiled by ancient pines, their branches clawing at the cloak like jealous guardians. Elara's visions flickered at the edges of her mind, fragments of the greater storm, torches flaring against the night, the metallic clash of steel, her own voice rising above the chaos. The Collar de Sangue guided her, its warmth a compass through the moral haze, urging her toward confrontation, not as victim, but as the unseen force that could tip the scales. Thorn walked beside her, his limp concealed by sheer will, his melancholy a palpable aura that softened only when his gaze met hers. "Forgiveness is a blade turned inward," he murmured during a brief respite, his breath fogging the air between them. "I spared my brother once, saw in him the youth I lost to the throne. Now war calls for reckoning or mercy's final test. As dawn bled gray into the sky, they crested a ridge overlooking the ironclad valley, a vast basin cradled by jagged spires of ice and stone. Below, the shadow packs had gathered, a sea of fur and armor undulating under banners of black and crimson, 10,000 strong as the vision foretold. Torches dotted the snow like fallen stars, their flames roaring against the wind, casting a hellish glow that turned the white expanse to rivers of molten red. At the forefront stood the traitor, Thorn's brother, Riven, his form hulking and triumphant, clad in armor forged from the realm's ancient forges, eyes burning with the same golden fire twisted by ambition. He paced before his legions, his voice booming like thunder over the din, invoking the old laws of conquest, promising unity through subjugation. Ilara's stomach twisted, the Colar de Sangre flaring hot as memories of her own pack's betrayal surged. Elders' stone faces, the Alpha's recoil, the exile's cold march into nothingness. This was no mere hunt, it was judgment incarnate, the past rising to devour the present. Thorn tensed beside her, his hand clenching the dagger's hilt, the scars on his knuckles whitening. "There," he said, voice a low snarl laced with grief. "The one who wore my trust like a noose. He rallies them with lies of my weakness, my mercy a chain they would snap." Yet even in his rage, ethics held him. The king's melancholy a tether against blind vengeance, his gaze flicking to her as if seeking the Pathfinder's light. They descended under cover of mist, the wind masking their approach until they breached the outer lines, shadows among shadows. Chaos erupted as recognition spread, weavos splitting the air, blades drawn in a frenzy of snarls and steel. Riven turned, his face contorting from triumph to shock, then fury, as Thorn stepped into the torchlight, Ilara at his side. The manto rasgado, billowing like a banner, reclaimed. "Brother," Thorn called, his voice cutting through the tumult, steady despite the blood loss that paled his features. "The throne is not a prize for betrayal. Stand down and let the goddess judge us both." Riven's laugh was a bark of scorn, his claws extending as he advanced, the packs closing in like a noose of fangs and fury. "Judgment. You speak of mercy while the realm crumbles under your softness. This Omega at your side, another weakness to exploit?" His eyes raked over Ilara, dismissing her as the exiles were dismissed, but the Colar de Sangre thrummed, visions crystallizing, her voice, the command, the turning tide. The confrontation swelled, warriors lunging from all sides, the air thick with the coppery reek of blood and the acrid bite of fierce sweat. Thorn fought with feral grace, his dagger flashing in arcs of moonlight, shielding her even as wounds reopened, crimson staining the snow. Ilara's heart thundered, the moral chasm yawning wide. Flee to freedom, leaving the king to his fate, or embrace the bond, wielding her gift amid the slaughter. A rival Alpha, Riven's lieutenant, a brute with eyes like chipped obsidian, lunged at her, claws aimed to rend. Instinct surged, the Colar de Sangre igniting like inner fire. "Stop!" she cried, her voice not a scream but a clarion infused with the goddess's lunar essence, rippling through the fray like wind over flames. The brute faltered, his strike hanging mid-air, confusion etching his snarl. Warriors paused, heads turning, the pack's aggression fracturing under the weight of her unseen command. Riven whirled, his golden eyes widening in dawning horror. "What sorcery is this?" he roared, but Thorn smiled then. The vision's echo, defiant amid the encirclement, pointing to her with bloodied hand. "Do what she said," he commanded, his voice a thunderclap of reclaimed authority. The words hung, a moral fulcrum, forgiveness offered in the heart of war or the freedom of letting kin fall. Ilara met Riven's gaze, empathy warring with justice, the Colar de Sangre a bridge between rejection's pain and redemption's dawn. The packs hesitated, the tide teetering on her next breath, a choice that could forgive the traitor or unleash the storm, binding her soul to Thorn's fractured legacy forever. The snow drank the first spilled blood, silent witness to the ethical precipice, as the moon watched, unblinking, demanding her verdict in the language of fire and frost. The moon hung like a severed crown above the ironclad valley, its fractured light splintering across the snowfields where blood began to pool in dark, steaming rivulets. Ilara stood at the heart of the maelstrom, the collar de sangue a blazing forge against her throat, its runes alive with the goddess's unyielding fire. The air thrummed with the raw cacophony of war, clashing steel like thunder's wrath, weavos ripping from throats both feral and furious, the wet crunch of flesh yielding to claw. 10,000 shadows encircled them, a living noose of fur and fury, their torches flaring against the night to paint the white expanse in strokes of infernal red. Riven's legions pressed in, eyes gleaming with the hunger of betrayal, but her voice had pierced the chaos, a lunar clarion that held them in thrall, their strikes faltering like flames starved of wind. Thorn fought at her side, his form a whirlwind of shadowed grace, the dagger in his grip an extension of his will, slashing, parrying, shielding her from the lunging brutes who tested the boundaries of her command. Blood slicked his arms, mingling with the fresh wounds that reopened across his chest, yet his golden eyes burned with that prophesied smile, defiant amid the encirclement. He pointed to her once more, his voice rising above the din like a decree from ancient thrones. "Do what she said." The words echoed, rippling through the packs, sowing seeds of doubt in the soil of their rage. Warriors hesitated, claws retracting, gazes shifting from Riven's snarling form to the Omega who stood unbound, her shift torn and bloodied, the manto rasgado clutched in her fist like a talisman of reclaimed fate. Ilara's heart pounded a war drum in her chest, the ethical precipice sharpening to a razor's edge. The vision had led her here, not to conquer, but to choose, sacrifice the solitude of her exile for the healing of a fractured realm, or unleash the storm and claim her freedom in the wild's indifferent arms. Riven advanced through the fray, his massive frame shoving aside his own lieutenants, armor clanking like chains of ambition. His face, so like thorns yet twisted by resentment's venom, contorted in disbelief and fury. "Sorcery from a cast-off bitch?" he bellowed, his voice a guttural roar that stirred the snow into eddies at his feet. Claws extended, he lunged, aiming not for Thorn but for her, the perceived weakness, the key to his brother's undoing. Time fractured in that instant, the world narrowing to the arc of his strike, the metallic tang of impending blood thick on her tongue. Ilara did not flinch. The collar de sangue surged, channeling the goddess's essence through her veins like liquid moonlight. She stepped forward, her voice emerging not as plea, but as inexorable truth, woven from the threads of her rejection's pain. "Enough," she commanded, the word infused with the Pathfinder's gift, a spiritual force that bound the air itself. Riven froze mid-leap, his body rigid as if ensnared by invisible roots, golden eyes widening in terror at the unseen power coiling around him. The pack stilled, a collective breath held, the torch's flames bowing low as if in reverence to the lunar decree. Thorn reached her side, his hand finding her waist, steadying her against the tremor of exertion that racked her frame. His touch was anchor and spark, the bond they had resisted now a roaring blaze, born of shared scars under the moon's gaze. "Brother," he said, his tone laced with the melancholy of lost kinship, stepping into the space between them. Blood dripped from his brow, tracing crimson paths down his cheek like tears of the realm he sought to mend. "The throne demands not your hate, but our mercy. I denied you its weight to spare you this, ambition's devouring maw. Join us, or let the goddess claim what you've twisted." Riven's snarl fractured, the Alpha's pride warring with the vision's inexorable pull. Around them, the shadow packs murmured, loyalty fracturing like ice under spring's thaw, some dropping blades into the snow, others kneeling, their weavos shifting from rage to a haunting chorus of submission. The moral choice hung palpable, a spiritual crossroads etched in frost and fire, forgiveness as the ultimate strength, or war's pyre consuming all. Elara felt the weight of it in her bones, the collar de sangue cooling slightly, its warmth ebbing as the Pathfinder's light revealed the truth. Redemption not through vengeance, but through the quiet power of compassion, her exile's rebirth as the realm's salvation. Riven's claws retracted, his massive form slumping to one knee, the armor's weight bowing him not in defeat, but in the raw unraveling of guilt long buried. "You spared me once," he rasped, voice breaking like thunder yielding to rain, "and I forged chains from your mercy. Forgive this fool's path, brother, or end it here." The valley fell silent, save for the wind's sigh and the distant crackle of dying torches, the moon bearing witness to the choice that could heal or shatter. Thorn extended his free hand, the gesture a bridge across the chasm of betrayal, his eyes meeting Elara's in silent communion. She nodded, the bond sealing in that shared gaze, love as proof, not prize, a union forged in the crucible of trial. "We choose healing," Thorn declared, pulling Riven to his feet, the brothers clasping arms amid the kneeling packs, the air shimmering with the fragile dawn of reconciliation. Elara's visions cleared, revealing not endless war but a realm reborn, thrones tempered by Omega's light, kings mended by the wounds they dared to bear. As the first rays of sun pierced the peaks, gilding the snow in hues of gold and rose, Elara leaned into Thorn's side, the manto rasgado, now a shared mantle, its tears mended by invisible threads of fate. The collar de sangue lay quiet at last, its runes fading to a soft glow, no longer curse but crown. Exhaustion claimed them gently, the packs dispersing into the thawing wilds, whispers of the Pathfinder's legend already weaving through the pines. In the hush, Thorn pressed his lips to her temple, a vow unspoken, redemption's flame, kindled in rejection's frost, burning eternal. The moon dipped below the horizon, yielding to the light of Renacimento, as two souls, once broken, now whole, walked the path of destiny entwined, the goddess's smile hidden in the warming breeze. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.